When the woman with silver-threaded hair stepped off the stagecoach into Red Flint's frozen mud, she carried a suitcase, a stack of unanswered letters, and the kind of pride that survives being broken. Across the street, Grant Kessler, the rancher who was supposed to marry her, fed her last letter into a barrel fire without reading it. He had expected someone younger, someone grateful. What he got was Vivian Shaw, a woman in her late 40s who had already been discarded by polite society once and had no intention of letting it happen again. This wasn't a love story. This was a reckoning. If you want to see how a woman everyone underestimated became the most dangerous force on the frontier, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The stagecoach hit another rut, and Vivian Shaw's head knocked against the window frame hard enough to leave a bruise. She didn't flinch. She had learned years ago that flinching only invited more attention, more questions, more pity. Instead, she straightened her hat, smoothed the front of her coat, worn but clean, and kept her gaze fixed on the landscape rolling past. Wyoming territory in late November looked like the end of the world. Gray sky pressed down on gray earth. The scrub grass lay flat under the wind, and the hills in the distance seemed to crouch like animals waiting for something to die. Vivian had seen prettier places. She had also seen worse. The driver shouted something she couldn't make out over the rattle of the wheels. A moment later, the coach lurched to a stop, and the door swung open. Cold air rushed in, sharp enough to sting. "Red Flint," the driver said. He was already hauling her trunk down from the back. End of the line. Vivian stepped out into the mud. It grabbed at her boots immediately, thick and half frozen. She looked down the street, if you could call it that. A dozen buildings, most of them leaning. A general store with a cracked sign. A saloon that smelled like urine and stale beer even from 30 feet away. A livery stable with a roof that had caved in on one side. This was Red Flint. This was where Grant Kessler lived. This was where she was supposed to start over. She spotted him almost immediately. He was standing outside the general store, one boot propped on the bottom step, arms crossed over his chest. Tall, broad-shouldered, face like a hatchet, all sharp angles and no softness. His hat was pulled low, but she could see his eyes tracking her as she walked toward him. He didn't move. Vivian stopped a few feet away. She set down her suitcase and waited. Grant Kessler looked her over the way a man might inspect a horse he wasn't sure he wanted to buy. His gaze lingered on her face, the lines around her mouth, the gray in her hair, the way her coat hung a little loose because she had lost weight over the past year. She knew what he was seeing, a woman past 40. A woman who had been pretty once, maybe, but that was a long time ago. "You're late," he said finally. "The stagecoach broke an axle outside Rollins," Vivian said. Her voice was calm, steady. "I got here as fast as I could." Grant grunted. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. Vivian recognized her own handwriting on the front. He had never opened it. "I don't need this," he said. He walked over to a barrel fire burning near the corner of the store. Without looking at her, he tossed the letter into the flames. Vivian watched it curl and blacken. She didn't say anything. Grant turned back to her. "I was expecting someone younger." "I'm sure you were." "Someone who could cook, clean, handle the work." "I can do all of that." "Can you?" He looked her up and down again. "You look like you've been through the ringer." Vivian felt something sharp twist in her chest, but she kept her face blank. She had spent the last 2 years perfecting that expression. "I'm here, Mr. Kessler. That's what we agreed on. If you've changed your mind, I'll need to know now so I can make other arrangements." Grant stared at her for a long moment. Then he picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing and started walking. "Come on." The ranch was 3 miles outside town. Grant didn't speak during the ride. He drove the wagon hard, and Vivian held onto the seat with both hands to keep from being thrown off. The road was barely a road at all, just 2 ruts carved into the frozen ground. When they finally pulled up to the house, Vivian's first thought was that it looked like a place people went to give up. The house itself was small, squat, built from rough timber that had weathered to the color of old bone. The roof sagged in the middle. One of the shutters hung crooked. There was a barn behind the house, and beyond that, a few scattered outbuildings that looked like they were held together with rust and hope. Grant climbed down from the wagon and started unloading her trunk. Vivian got down on her own and stood there, looking at the place. "It's not much," Grant said. He wasn't apologizing, just stating a fact. No, Vivian said. It's not. He carried her trunk inside. Vivian followed. The interior was worse than the exterior. The main room was dim, lit only by a single oil lamp on the table. The walls were bare. The floor was dirt, packed hard from years of boots. There was a stove in the corner, a table with 2 chairs, and a shelf with a few tin plates and cups. That was it. Grant set her trunk down near the wall. You'll sleep in the back room. There's a bed. Not much else. Vivian walked over to the back room and pushed the door open. The bed was a narrow cot with a thin mattress and a single wool blanket. There was a crack in the wall wide enough to see daylight through. She turned back to Grant. Where do you sleep? Out in the barn. Why? Because that's where I sleep. Vivian studied him. There was something hollow in his face, something that went deeper than exhaustion. She had seen that look before. She had worn it herself once. All right, she said. Grant nodded. He walked back to the door, then stopped. There's a woman who comes by sometimes. Martha. She was married to my brother. He's dead now. She helps out when she can. Does she live nearby? Close enough. Is there anyone else? No. So it's just you. It's just me. Vivian watched him leave. She heard the wagon rattle away and then the sound of his boots crossing the yard toward the barn. She stood there in this cold, dim house and tried to decide whether she had made the worst mistake of her life or whether this was simply the next step in a long series of mistakes that had started years ago. She spent the first night awake. The wind came through the crack in the wall like a knife, and no matter how many times she pulled the blanket up, she couldn't get warm. She lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and thought about the life she had left behind. Boston. A small apartment near the docks. A job as a bookkeeper for a shipping company. She had been good at it, better than good. She had caught discrepancies in the accounts that no one else had noticed. Small at first, then larger, then impossible to ignore. She had brought it to her supervisor. He had thanked her. 2 weeks later, she was let go. No explanation, no reference. Just a terse note saying her services were no longer required. It had taken her months to figure out what had happened. The supervisor had been skimming money from the accounts for years, and Vivian had stumbled onto the trail. Instead of investigating, the company had chosen to protect him and get rid of her. By the time she understood, it was too late. Word had spread. No one would hire her. She was too sharp, too inconvenient, too old to be worth the trouble. She had spent a year trying to find work. When that failed, she had started answering mail-order bride advertisements. Most of the men who responded wanted someone young, someone pretty, someone who didn't ask questions. Grant Kessler had been the only one who said he didn't care about age. He just needed someone who could work. Vivian had taken him at his word. Now, lying in this freezing room, she wondered if he had lied or if he simply hadn't thought it through. In the morning, she got up before dawn and went outside. The ranch looked even worse in the pale light. The barn was missing half its roof. The fence posts were leaning at angles that made no sense. There were tools scattered in the yard, rusted and half buried in the mud. It was the kind of place that screamed neglect, the kind of place where things had been falling apart for so long that no one remembered what they were supposed to look like when they worked. Vivian walked over to the barn. Grant was already up, mucking out a stall. He didn't look at her when she came in. "You're up early," he said. "I don't sleep much." "Good. There's work to do." Vivian looked around. There were 3 horses in the barn, all of them thin. The hay in the corner looked moldy. The water trough was cracked. "How long have you been running this place on your own?" 2 years. "What happened 2 years ago?" Grant paused, then went back to shoveling. "My brother died. His wife moved into town. I stayed." "Why?" "Because someone had to." Vivian studied him. There was something bitter in the way he said it, something that sounded less like duty and more like punishment. She decided not to push. Not yet. "Where do you keep your records?" she asked. Grant stopped. He looked at her like she had just asked him to recite poetry. "Records?" "Financial records. Loan papers, bills, receipts." "I don't keep records." "You don't keep records?" "No." "How do you know how much you owe?" "I know." "How do you know when payments are due?" "They tell me." "Who tells you?" "The bank?" Vivian felt something cold settle in her chest. Mr. Kessler, if you don't have records, you don't know what you owe. And if you don't know what you owe, they can tell you anything. Grant set down the shovel. He turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw something other than exhaustion in his eyes. It was anger, but it was the kind of anger that came from fear. Are you saying someone's cheating me? I'm saying you don't know, and that's dangerous. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he walked past her, out of the barn, and across the yard. Vivian followed. He led her into the house and over to a wooden crate shoved under the table. He kicked it toward her. There. Vivian knelt down and opened the crate. Inside were papers, dozens of them, crumpled and torn and stained with water and mud. She pulled out the first one and smoothed it flat. It was a promissory note dated 3 years ago. The interest rate was 15%. She pulled out another, a bill for seed. The amount was twice what it should have been. Another, a notice of late payment. The penalty was brutal. Another, a loan amendment signed by someone whose signature was so illegible it could have been anyone. Vivian sat back on her heels. Her hands were shaking. She set the papers down and looked up at Grant. How much do you owe? I don't know. Guess. Maybe 2,000, maybe more. When was the last time you made a payment? Last month, I sold 6 head of cattle. How much did you get? 300. And how much did they credit you? Grant hesitated. I don't know. Vivian stood up. She walked over to the stove and stood there, staring at the cold iron. She felt the way she had felt in Boston, standing in that office with her supervisor's false smile and the knowledge that no one would believe her. Except this time, it wasn't just her career at stake. This time, it was survival. Mr. Kessler, she said quietly, someone is stealing from you. Grant didn't believe her. Not at first. He argued. He said the bank wouldn't do that. He said Calvin Rourke, the land agent who handled his loans, was a respectable man. He said Vivian didn't understand how things worked out here. Vivian didn't argue back. She just started sorting the papers. It took her 3 days. She worked at the kitchen table from dawn until well after dark, spreading out the papers, cross-referencing dates, checking signatures, calculating totals. Grant ignored her. He went about his work, feeding the horses, mending fence, hauling water, and pretended she wasn't there. On the 4th day, Vivian called him inside. She had the papers laid out in rows across the table. Grant stood in the doorway, arms crossed, waiting. Sit down, Vivian said. He didn't move. Sit down, Mr. Kessler. He sat. Vivian picked up the first paper. This is the original loan you took out 4 years ago. $1,000 at 12% interest. Reasonable terms for the time. She set it down and picked up another. This is an amendment to that loan, dated 6 months later. It raises the interest rate to 15%. Do you remember signing this? Grant frowned. No. Look at the signature. He leaned forward and squinted at the page. The signature was his name, but the handwriting was wrong. The loops were too tight, the slant too sharp. That's not my signature. No, it's not. Vivian set that paper down and picked up another. This is a bill for seed you purchased 2 years ago. The amount is $400. Does that sound right? No, I paid $200. That's what I thought. But according to this bill, you owe $400. And according to this, she held up another paper. You were charged a late fee of $50 because you didn't pay the full amount on time. Grant's face was turning red. That's bullshit. Yes, it is. Vivian picked up another paper. This is a notice of foreclosure dated 3 months ago. It says you're in default on your loan and that the property will be seized unless you pay the full amount owed, which, according to this, is now $3,200. Grant stared at her. 3,000? 3,200 plus fees and penalties. That's impossible. I don't owe that much. You don't. But they're saying you do. And unless you can prove otherwise, they'll take the ranch. Grant stood up so fast his chair fell over. He paced across the room, his hands clenched into fists. Rourke did this. Rourke? Or someone working with him. I don't know yet. But this wasn't an accident. Someone has been doctoring your records, inflating your debt, and waiting for you to fail. Grant stopped pacing. He turned to face her, and his expression was raw, stripped of all the walls he had been hiding behind. Why would they do that? Because your land is worth more than you think, and because desperate men make easy targets. Grant stared at her. Then he walked over to the table, picked up the papers, and threw them across the room. I should have known. I should have fucking known. Vivian didn't flinch. She waited until he was done, then started picking up the papers. Knowing doesn't help us now. We need a plan. A plan? What kind of plan? They've got the law on their side. They've got the judges. They've got everything. They've got everything except proof that you know what they're doing. Vivian straightened the papers and set them back on the table. If we can document the fraud, we can fight this, but we need time. We don't have time. They're coming for the ranch in 2 weeks. Then we have 2 weeks. Grant looked at her like she was insane. You think you can take down Calvin Rourke in 2 weeks? I think I can try. Why? Why would you do this? You don't owe me anything. You just got here. Vivian met his gaze. She thought about Boston. She thought about the job she lost, the reputation she couldn't rebuild, the years she spent being told she was too old, too sharp, too much trouble. She thought about stepping off that stagecoach into the mud and seeing Grant burn her letter without reading it. She thought about every man who had ever looked at her and decided she wasn't worth the effort. Because they already threw me away once, she said, and I'll be damned if I let them do it again. The next morning, Vivian rode into town. Grant had offered to come with her, but she told him to stay. She needed him working on the ranch, keeping up appearances. If Rourke thought they were panicking, he would move faster. If he thought they were just going about their business, they might have a little more time. Red Flint looked even worse in daylight. The mud was deeper, the buildings more crooked. A few people were out, men loading a wagon, a woman sweeping the porch of the general store, but they all stopped and stared when Vivian rode past. She ignored them. She tied her horse outside the land office and went inside. The office was warmer than the rest of the town, heated by a pot-bellied stove in the corner. There was a desk near the window, piled high with papers. Behind the desk sat a man in a clean suit, his hair slicked back, his hands folded neatly in front of him. He looked up when Vivian walked in and smiled. "Good morning," he said. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Calvin Rourke." "You found him." He stood and gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please, sit." Vivian sat. She folded her hands in her lap and studied him. Calvin Rourke was younger than she had expected, maybe 40, with soft hands and a face that hadn't seen much sun. He looked like a man who spent his days indoors, counting money and signing papers. He looked like a man who had never worked a day in his life. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Shaw?" "Vivian Shaw. I'm staying at the Kessler Ranch." Rourke's smile didn't falter, but something shifted in his eyes. "Ah, yes. Mr. Kessler mentioned he was expecting a housekeeper." "I'm his wife." "His wife?" Rourke's eyebrows went up. "I wasn't aware Mr. Kessler had remarried." "It's recent." "I see." Rourke sat back in his chair. "Well, congratulations. I'm sure you'll be very happy." Vivian didn't smile. "I'm here about Mr. Kessler's loan." "His loan?" Rourke's tone was pleasant, polite. "Is there a problem?" "I'd like to review the terms." "Of course. I'd be happy to provide a summary." He reached for a ledger on his desk and flipped it open. "Let's see. Mr. Kessler currently owes $3,200, due in full by the end of the month. If the payment is not made, the property will be seized to satisfy the debt." "That's not what I asked. I want to see the original loan documents." Rourke looked up. His smile was still there, but it was thinner now. "I'm afraid those are confidential." "They're not confidential if I'm his wife." "Mrs. Shaw, I understand you're concerned, but I assure you everything is in order. Mr. Kessler signed all the necessary paperwork. If he has questions, he's welcome to come in and discuss them with me." "He doesn't have questions, I do." Rourke closed the ledger. "Mrs. Shaw, with all due respect, financial matters can be complicated. Perhaps it would be better if your husband handled this directly." Vivian felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. She knew that tone. She had heard it 100 times before. In Boston, in New York, in every office and bank and courtroom where she had tried to be taken seriously. It was the tone men used when they wanted you to know that your opinion didn't matter, that you were wasting their time, that you should go home and let the men handle things. She leaned forward. Mr. Rourke, I've been handling financial matters since before you learned to shave. If the terms of my husband's loan are legitimate, you should have no problem showing me the documents. Unless, of course, there's something you'd prefer I didn't see. Rourke's smile disappeared. I don't appreciate your insinuation. And I don't appreciate being patronized. They stared at each other across the desk. Finally, Rourke stood. I think we're done here. Not quite. Vivian stood as well. I'll be filing a formal request to review all loan documents related to the Kessler Ranch. If you refuse, I'll take it to the county court. The county court won't help you, Mrs. Shaw. Then I'll go higher. Rourke walked around the desk and opened the door. Good luck with that. Vivian walked out. She untied her horse, climbed into the saddle, and rode back toward the ranch. She didn't look back, but she could feel Rourke's eyes on her the whole way down the street. When she got back to the ranch, Grant was waiting for her in the yard. How did it go? About as well as I expected. He wouldn't show you the documents. No. So what do we do now? Vivian climbed down from the horse and handed him the reins. We find someone who will. Who? I don't know yet, but there has to be someone in this territory who isn't afraid of Calvin Rourke. Grant looked at her like she had just suggested they fly to the moon. Good luck finding them. Vivian walked past him toward the house. I don't believe in luck, Mr. Kessler. I believe in leverage. That night, there was a knock on the door. Vivian was at the table going through the papers again when she heard it. Grant was in the barn. She stood, walked to the door, and opened it. A woman stood on the porch. She was younger than Vivian, maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back in a braid and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. She was holding a basket covered with a cloth. You must be Vivian, the woman said. I am. I'm Martha, Grant's sister-in-law. Vivian stepped aside. Come in. Martha walked into the house and set the basket on the table. She pulled back the cloth, revealing bread, cheese, and a jar of preserves. I thought you might need some food. Grant's not much of a cook. Thank you. Martha looked around the room, taking in the bare walls, the cracked stove, the pile of papers on the table. Her gaze lingered on the papers. Grant told me what you're doing. Did he? He said you think someone's been stealing from him. I don't think it. I know it. Martha sat down in one of the chairs. She folded her hands in her lap, and Vivian saw that they were shaking. My husband, Grant's brother, he thought the same thing, right before he died. Vivian sat down across from her. What happened? He was trying to fight the bank. He said the numbers didn't add up. He said someone was doctoring the books. No one believed him. They said he was just bad at managing money. He got desperate, started drinking. One night he took the wagon out in a storm and didn't come back. They found him 2 days later. He'd driven off a cliff. Martha's voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. Everyone said it was an accident. I knew it wasn't. He wouldn't have done that, not unless he thought he had no other choice. Vivian reached across the table and covered Martha's hands with her own. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, just don't let it happen to Grant. I won't. Martha looked at her. You don't know what you're up against. Rourke has the whole county in his pocket. Judges, sheriffs, everyone. If you try to fight him, he'll destroy you. He can try. I'm serious. They already destroyed my husband. They'll do the same to you. Vivian squeezed Martha's hands. Then I'll make sure I take them down with me. Martha stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. All right, what do you need? I need names. Anyone else who's been cheated. Anyone who might be willing to talk. There are a few. Widows, mostly. Men who lost their ranches. They're scared. Can you get me a list? I can try. Good. And Martha? Don't tell anyone what we're doing. Not yet. Martha stood. She picked up the empty basket and walked to the door. Before she left, she turned back. Vivian? Yes? Thank you. Vivian nodded. She watched Martha disappear into the dark, then closed the door and went back to the table. She picked up the papers and started reading again. She didn't stop until the sun came up. Over the next week, Martha came back 3 times. Each time, she brought a name. The first was a widow named Sarah Cullen, who lived in a one-room cabin 5 miles south of Red Flint. Her husband had died 2 years ago, and the bank had taken her land 6 months later. She was living on charity now, too scared to talk. The second was a rancher named Tom Beckett, who had lost half his herd to a bad winter, and the other half to loan penalties he swore he never agreed to. He had moved his family into town and was working at the livery stable for pennies. The third was an older man named Henry Moss, who had been one of the first settlers in the area. He had owned 300 acres before the drought hit. Now he owned nothing. He spent most of his time at the saloon, drinking away whatever coins he could beg or borrow. Vivian wrote down every name. She asked Martha about their debts, their payments, their dealings with Rourke. Martha didn't have all the details, but she had enough. The pattern was the same every time. Small discrepancies at first, inflated bills, late fees that appeared out of nowhere, then the foreclosure notice, then nothing. They all just gave up, Martha said one afternoon. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold. They didn't know how to fight back. Did any of them try? Vivian asked. Tom did. He went to the county judge. The judge told him he should have read the fine print. And the others? Sarah was too scared. Henry was too drunk. They all just walked away. Vivian set down her pen. What about your husband? You said he tried to fight. Martha's face went tight. He tried. He went to the bank, to the land office, to the courthouse. No one would listen. They told him he was imagining things. They told him he was a bad businessman. They made him feel like he was losing his mind. That's what they do, Vivian said quietly. They make you doubt yourself. They make you think it's your fault. Is it working on you? Vivian looked up. Martha was watching her with an expression that was half hope, half fear. No, it's not. Why not? Because I've been through this before, and I know how it ends if you don't fight. Martha nodded slowly. She took a sip of her cold coffee and set the cup down. What do you need from me? I need you to talk to them. Sarah, Tom, Henry, anyone else you can think of. Tell them I want to meet. They won't come. They're too afraid. Then I'll go to them. That's not safe. If Rourke finds out you're talking to people, he already knows I'm a problem, Vivian said. He knew it the moment I walked into his office. The question isn't whether he'll come after me. The question is when. Martha looked down at her hands. I don't want you to end up like my husband. I won't. How do you know? Vivian didn't answer right away. She thought about the letter Grant had burned without reading. She thought about the job she had lost in Boston, the doors that had closed in her face, the years she had spent being told she was too old, too difficult, too much. She thought about stepping off that stagecoach and deciding, somewhere in the cold and the mud, that she was done being quiet. Because I'm not fighting for a ranch, she said. I'm fighting because I'm tired of men like Rourke deciding who gets to matter. Martha stared at her. Then she stood, picked up her cup, and walked to the door. I'll talk to them, but I can't promise they'll listen. That's all I'm asking. After Martha left, Vivian went back to the papers. She had been over them so many times that she could recite the numbers in her sleep, but she kept looking because she knew there had to be something she was missing, some thread she could pull that would unravel the whole thing. Grant came in around sunset. He was covered in mud from fixing a section of fence that had collapsed in the wind. He looked at Vivian, still hunched over the table, and shook his head. You're going to ruin your eyes, he said. Better my eyes than your ranch. Grant walked over to the stove and poured himself a cup of coffee. He stood there for a moment, steam rising from the cup, then turned to face her. You really think you can do this? I don't know. That's not much of an answer. It's the only one I have. Grant took a sip of his coffee. Rourke came by today. Vivian's head snapped up. What? He was riding past on his way to town. Stopped to say hello. What did he want? He wanted to know if I was planning to make my payment on time. What did you tell him? I told him I was working on it. Vivian set down the paper she was holding. Did he say anything else? He asked about you. What did he ask? He wanted to know where you came from, what you did before you got here, whether you had any family. Vivian felt something cold settle in her chest. What did you tell him? I told him it was none of his business. Good. Grant sat down across from her. He looked tired, older than he had a week ago. Vivian, if this gets dangerous, it's already dangerous. I mean, If it gets worse. If Rourke comes after you, I don't want you getting hurt because of me. Vivian looked at him. His face was all hard edges and exhaustion, but there was something else there too, something that looked almost like concern. It surprised her. She wasn't used to people worrying about her. I'll be fine, she said. You don't know that. Neither do you. Grant opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He drank his coffee in silence. After a while, he stood and walked to the door. I'm going to check on the horses. Grant. He stopped. Thank you. He didn't turn around. For what? For letting me stay. Grant was quiet for a moment, then he nodded and walked out. Vivian watched him go. Then she went back to the papers. 2 days later, Martha brought Sarah Cullen to the ranch. Sarah was younger than Vivian had expected, maybe 30, with a thin face and hands that looked like they had worked hard for a long time. She didn't speak when she came in. She just stood near the door, clutching her shawl, looking like she wanted to run. Sarah, this is Vivian, Martha said. She's the one I told you about. Sarah nodded but didn't say anything. Vivian stood and gestured to the table. Please, sit. Sarah hesitated, then sat. She kept her eyes down, her hands folded in her lap. Vivian sat across from her. Martha told me about your husband. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry, Sarah said quietly. It doesn't help. No, it doesn't. Sarah looked up. Her eyes were red, like she had been crying for so long that it had become part of her face. Martha said you're trying to fight the bank. I am. Why? Because they're stealing from people, and no one's stopping them. Sarah shook her head. You can't stop them. They're too powerful. Maybe, but I'd like to try. You'll lose, and then they'll come after you too. They're already coming after me. Sarah stared at her. Then why are you doing this? Vivian didn't have a good answer for that. She could have said it was because she believed in justice, or because she wanted to help, or because it was the right thing to do. But none of those felt true. The truth was simpler and uglier. She was doing this because she was angry, because she had spent too many years being pushed aside, ignored, dismissed, because she had walked into Rourke's office and seen the same smug certainty in his eyes that she had seen in every other man who had ever told her to go home and let the men handle things. Because I'm tired of losing, Vivian said. Sarah looked down at her hands. I lost everything. My land, my home. I couldn't even keep my husband's tools. They took it all. Do you remember signing the papers? Some of them, not all. What do you remember? Sarah frowned. There was a loan. My husband took it out to buy seed after the drought. The man at the bank said it was a good deal. Low interest, easy terms. How much was the loan? $500. And how much did they say you owed when they foreclosed? $1,200. Vivian wrote that down. Did they give you an accounting? A breakdown of how the debt grew? They said there were fees, penalties for late payments. Interest. Did you make late payments? No, we paid on time every month. My husband kept a ledger. He wrote down every payment. Do you still have the ledger? Sarah shook her head. They took it when they took the house. Vivian set down her pen. Sarah, I need you to think carefully. When you signed the loan papers, was there anyone else in the room? Just the man from the bank, Mr. Rourke. Did he explain the terms? He said it was standard. He said we didn't need to worry. Did you read the papers before you signed? Sarah's face flushed. I can't read very well. My husband handled that. And your husband? Did he read them? He tried. But Mr. Rourke kept talking, kept pointing to where we needed to sign. He said we didn't have time to go over every detail. He said if we didn't sign that day, the offer would expire. Vivian felt the anger rising in her chest again. It was the same story every time. The same pressure, the same rush, the same lies. Sarah, I think they tricked you. I think the terms they gave you weren't the terms they enforced, and I think they did it on purpose. Sarah looked at her with something close to hope. Can you prove it? I'm trying. What do you need from me? I need you to write down everything you remember. Dates, amounts, names, anything you can think of. Will it help? I don't know, but it's a start. Sarah nodded. She stood, and Martha stood with her. I'll try, but I don't think anyone will believe me. They will, Vivian said, if I have anything to say about it. After Sarah left, Martha stayed behind. She looked at Vivian with an expression that was hard to read. You're giving her hope. That's dangerous. More dangerous than letting her believe she deserved what happened? I'm just saying, if you can't deliver, if this doesn't work, she'll be worse off than she was before. Then I'll make sure it works. Martha didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. She just nodded and left. Vivian sat at the table for a long time after that, staring at the papers. She thought about Sarah's face, the way she had clutched her shawl like it was the only thing holding her together. She thought about Martha's warning. She thought about Grant, out in the barn, working himself to exhaustion because he didn't know what else to do. And she thought about Rourke, sitting in his warm office, signing papers that destroyed lives, and never losing a night's sleep over it. She picked up her pen and went back to work. Tom Beckett came 3 days later. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and heavy, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of stone. He didn't want to come into the house. He stood in the yard, arms crossed, and waited for Vivian to come out. You the one asking questions? He said when she approached. I am. Why? Because I think you got cheated. Tom laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. Yeah, I got cheated. So did half the county. What are you going to do about it? I'm going to prove it. Good luck with that. Vivian studied him. He was angry, but it was the kind of anger that had been burning for so long that it had turned cold. Martha said you went to the judge. I did. Fat lot of good it did me. What did the judge say? He said I should have been more careful. He said if I didn't understand the terms, I shouldn't have signed. Did you understand the terms? I thought I did. Turned out I was wrong. What happened? Tom uncrossed his arms. He looked out at the horizon, at the hills rolling away into the distance. I took out a loan to buy cattle. The terms seemed fair. But every time I made a payment, they said I still owed more. I'd pay $100, and they'd say I only paid $50. I'd pay on time, and they'd say I was late. After a while, I couldn't keep up. They took my herd, then they took my land. Do you have records? I did. I kept everything. But when they foreclosed, they took the records too. Said it was part of the settlement. Vivian felt the familiar twist of anger in her chest. That's convenient. Yeah, real convenient. Tom, I'm trying to build a case. If I can show a pattern of fraud, I might be able to stop them, but I need help. Help from who? No one around here is going to stand up to Rourke. They're all too scared. I'm not. Tom looked at her. Really looked at her. She could see him trying to figure out if she was serious or just naive. You got a death wish, lady? No, I just have a problem with men who think they can get away with anything. Tom was quiet for a moment. Then he shook his head. You're going to get yourself killed. Maybe, but at least I'll go down swinging. Tom stared at her. Then, slowly, he smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile a man wears when he's already given up but wants to see what happens next. All right, what do you need? I need you to write down everything you remember. Dates, amounts, conversations, anything that might help. You think anyone's going to believe me? I think if enough people tell the same story, someone will have to listen. Tom nodded. I'll do it, but don't expect miracles. I don't believe in miracles, Mr. Beckett. I believe in evidence. Tom turned to leave, then stopped. Lady, you got guts. I'll give you that. But guts don't stop bullets. No, Vivian said, but they stop men like Rourke from sleeping easy. Tom laughed again, that same harsh sound, and walked away. Henry Moss was harder to find. Martha told Vivian he spent most of his time at the saloon, so that's where she went. It was the middle of the afternoon, and the place was nearly empty. A few men sat at the bar nursing drinks. In the corner, hunched over a table, was an old man with a gray beard and a face like old leather. He had a bottle in front of him, half empty. Vivian walked over and sat down across from him. He didn't look up. Henry Moss? She said. Who's asking? My name is Vivian Shaw. I'm staying at the Kessler Ranch. Henry took a drink from the bottle. Good for you. Martha Kessler sent me. That got his attention. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and watery. Martha's a good woman. She deserves better than this shithole town. She said you used to own land. Henry laughed. It turned into a cough, wet and rattling. Used to? Past tense? That's the key, ain't it? Used to. What happened? Same thing that happened to everyone else. I borrowed money, couldn't pay it back. They took everything. Do you remember how much you borrowed? 500? Maybe 6? Hell, I don't remember. How much did they say you owed when they foreclosed? A lot more than that. Vivian leaned forward. Henry, I'm trying to stop them from doing this to anyone else, but I need help. I need people who are willing to talk. Henry took another drink. Talk? What's the point? No one's going to listen. They never do. I'm listening. You're just one person, and you're new. You don't know how things work around here. Then tell me. Henry stared at her. Then he set down the bottle and leaned back in his chair. All right, you want to know how it works? I'll tell you. They find someone who's desperate, someone who needs money to survive. They offer a loan. The terms sound good. Too good maybe, but when you're desperate, you don't ask questions. You sign. And then the fees start. Late fees, penalty fees, interest that compounds faster than you can pay it off. Before you know it, you owe twice what you borrowed, and then they come for your land. And no one fights back? Why would they? The judges are in Rourke's pocket, the sheriff too. You fight, you lose, you shut up. At least you walk away alive. But you lose everything either way. Yeah, but at least you're still breathing. Vivian sat back. She looked at the old man in front of her, broken and bitter, and drowning in a bottle. And she felt something close to despair. This was what Rourke did. He didn't just steal land, he stole hope. He turned proud men into ghosts. Henry, she said quietly, I can't promise I'll win, but I can promise I'll try, and I could use your help. Henry picked up the bottle and drank. Then he set it down and looked at her. What do you want from me? I want you to write down what happened, everything you remember. What's the point? The point is that someone needs to tell the truth, even if no one's listening yet. Henry was quiet for a long time, then he nodded. All right, I'll do it. But don't expect me to testify in court or anything like that. I'm done sticking my neck out. That's fine, just write it down. Vivian stood and walked out of the saloon. The air outside was cold and clean, and she stood there for a moment, breathing it in, trying to wash the smell of whiskey and defeat out of her lungs. By the end of the second week, Vivian had 4 written statements. They weren't perfect. Sarah's handwriting was shaky, and Tom's was barely legible. Henry's was half coherent, written on scraps of paper in the dim light of the saloon. But they were something. They were proof that the pattern was real, that Rourke wasn't just careless or aggressive, he was a thief. Vivian laid the statements out on the table next to the papers from Grant's crate. She sat there for hours, cross-referencing dates, comparing terms, looking for the thread that connected everything. And then she found it. It was a name, a signature. It appeared on every amended loan, every inflated bill, every foreclosure notice. It wasn't Rourke's signature. It was someone else's, someone who worked for the county clerk's office, someone who had access to land records, loan documents, and legal filings. Vivian stared at the name. Then she stood, grabbed her coat, and went to find Grant. He was in the barn, trying to patch a hole in the roof with boards that were already half rotted. He looked down when she came in. I found something, she said. Grant climbed down the ladder. What? A name. Someone who's been signing off on all the fraudulent documents. If I can prove he's involved, I can tie this whole thing together. Who is it? Vivian handed him the paper. Grant looked at the signature and frowned. I know this guy. He works at the county clerk's office. He's the one who files all the land transfers. Exactly. And he's the one who's been making sure Rourke's forgeries look legitimate. Grant's face went hard. So what do? We go to the territorial attorney's office. We bypass the county court entirely. We take this to someone who doesn't answer to Rourke. And if they won't listen, then we go higher. But we have to try. Grant nodded slowly. Then he looked at her, and his expression was something she hadn't seen before. It was respect. You really think we can do this? I think we have to. Grant set the paper down. All right. When do we leave? Tomorrow. That night, Vivian lay in her narrow bed, staring at the crack in the wall. She thought about the statements, the signatures, the names. She thought about Sarah's face, Tom's anger, Henry's despair. She thought about Martha's husband, driving his wagon off a cliff because he couldn't see another way out. And she thought about Rourke sitting in his office, signing papers that destroyed lives, and sleeping soundly because he believed no one could touch him. Vivian closed her eyes. She didn't sleep. She never really did anymore. But she lay there in the dark, and she made a promise to herself. She was going to take him down, even if it killed her. They left before dawn. Grant drove the wagon, and Vivian sat beside him with a leather satchel on her lap containing every piece of evidence she had gathered. The road to Cheyenne was rough, carved through hills that looked like they had been frozen in the middle of collapsing. The sky was the color of old iron, and the wind cut through their coats like it had teeth. Grant didn't talk much. He never did. But halfway through the morning, he glanced over at her and said, "You ever been to Cheyenne?" "No. It's bigger than Red Flint, a lot bigger. People there don't know you. They don't owe you anything." "I know. I'm just saying, don't expect them to care." Vivian shifted the satchel on her lap. "I'm not expecting anything. I'm just hoping they'll listen." Grant grunted. He flicked the reins, and the horses picked up their pace. After a while, he said, "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did." "Why?" "You could have left, gone somewhere else, started over." Vivian looked out at the hills rolling past. She thought about all the places she had been, all the doors that had closed in her face, all the men who had looked at her like she was something to be tolerated until she became inconvenient. She thought about stepping off that stagecoach and seeing Grant burn her letter. She thought about the moment she had decided she was done running. "Because there's nowhere left to go," she said. Grant didn't respond, but after a moment, he nodded. They reached Cheyenne by late afternoon. The town was everything Red Flint wasn't: big, crowded, loud. Buildings lined the streets in neat rows, some of them 2 or 3 stories tall. There were people everywhere, men in suits and women in dresses that looked like they cost more than Grant's entire ranch. Wagons clattered past, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew. Vivian felt out of place immediately. She looked down at her worn coat, her mud-stained boots, and wondered what the hell she was doing here. Grant pulled the wagon up outside a brick building with a sign that read, "Territorial Attorney's Office." He climbed down and tied the horses to a post. Vivian got down on her own, clutching the satchel to her chest. "You ready?" Grant asked. "No." "Good. Let's go." Inside, the building smelled like paper and wood polish. There was a woman sitting at a desk near the front, typing on a machine that clacked with every keystroke. She looked up when they walked in. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her tone was polite but not warm. "We need to see the territorial attorney," Vivian said. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." The woman's expression didn't change. "The attorney doesn't see anyone without an appointment. It's urgent." "I'm sure it is, but the attorney is very busy. If you'd like to schedule, we're here about fraud," Vivian said. "Land fraud, affecting multiple ranches across the territory. If the attorney doesn't see us today, people are going to lose their homes." The woman stopped typing. She looked at Vivian, then at Grant, then back at Vivian. "Wait here." She stood and disappeared through a door at the back of the room. Vivian and Grant stood there in silence. After a few minutes, the door opened again, and a man stepped out. He was younger than Vivian had expected, maybe 40, with dark hair and a clean-shaven face. He wore a suit that looked expensive, and his eyes were sharp, the kind that missed nothing. "I'm Daniel Harper," he said. "Territorial attorney. My secretary says you're here about fraud." "That's right," Harper gestured toward the door. "Come in." They followed him into a small office lined with shelves full of law books. There was a desk in the center covered with papers. Harper sat down behind it and gestured to the 2 chairs across from him. Vivian and Grant sat. "All right," Harper said. "Tell me what this is about." Vivian opened the satchel and pulled out the papers. She laid them on the desk in neat stacks: Grant's loan documents, the statements from Sarah and Tom and Henry, the county clerk's signatures. Harper leaned forward and started looking through them. "This is Calvin Rourke's work?" he asked after a moment. "Yes. And you're saying he's been doctoring loan documents to inflate debts and seize property?" "That's exactly what I'm saying." Harper picked up one of the statements and read it. Then he set it down and looked at Vivian. "Why are you bringing this to me? Why not the county court?" "Because the county court is in Rourke's pocket." Harper's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious problem. Harper leaned back in his chair. He looked at Grant. And you're one of the ranchers affected by this? Yeah, Grant said. What's your situation? I owe $3,000. At least that's what they say, but I don't think I borrowed half that much. Harper looked back at Vivian. And you think you can prove this? I can prove there's a pattern. Forged signatures, inflated bills, falsified records, all of it tied to one man in the county clerk's office. Harper picked up another paper and studied it. Then he set it down and rubbed his eyes. Look, Mrs. Shaw. Mrs. Shaw, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. But what you're describing is a massive undertaking. You're talking about corruption at the county level, forgery, fraud. That kind of case takes time, it takes resources, and it takes evidence that will hold up in court. I have evidence. You have statements from people who lost their land. That's not the same thing. Statements can be dismissed as sour grapes. People who didn't read the fine print and now want someone to blame. Vivian felt the anger rising in her chest. These people were cheated. Maybe they were, but proving it is another matter. So you're not going to help. Harper sighed. I didn't say that. I'm saying this is complicated. If I open an investigation, Rourke is going to fight back. And he's got money, connections, and a lot of people who owe him favors. If I can't make this stick, he walks away clean, and everyone who talked to you ends up worse off than they were before. And if you don't try, he keeps stealing from people. Harper looked at her. You're very passionate about this. I've been where they are. I know what it's like to be cheated and have no one believe you. Harper was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. All right, leave the documents with me. I'll review them. If there's enough here to move forward, I'll open an investigation. How long will that take? A few weeks? Maybe longer? We don't have a few weeks. Grant's ranch is scheduled for foreclosure in 10 days. Harper's expression hardened. Then you need to find a way to stall it, file a motion, request an extension, do whatever you can to buy time. With who? The county judge? That's your only option. Vivian stood. She picked up the satchel and started putting the papers back inside. Grant stood too. Mrs. Shaw, Harper said, I'm not saying no. I'm saying this takes time. Time is something we don't have. She walked out of the office. Grant followed. They didn't speak until they were back outside, standing next to the wagon. So that's it? Grant said. We came all this way for nothing? No, we came to plant a seed. Harper's not going to move fast, but he's not going to ignore this either. If we can keep the pressure on, he'll have to act. And in the meantime? In the meantime, we go back and figure out how to stop Rourke on our own. Grant stared at her. You're serious? Do I look like I'm joking? Grant shook his head. You're out of your mind. Probably. They climbed into the wagon and started the long ride back to Red Flint. When they got back to the ranch, it was almost midnight. Vivian was exhausted, her body aching from the hours on the wagon, but she couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the papers, trying to figure out what to do next. Grant came in from the barn around 1 a.m. He looked at her and sighed. You're going to kill yourself. Not before I finish this. Grant poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. Vivian, I've been thinking, maybe we should just pay what we can and walk away. Start over somewhere else. Is that what you want? I don't know what I want. I just know this is eating you alive. Vivian set down her pen. She looked at him, at the exhaustion in his face, the defeat in his eyes. Grant, if we walk away, Rourke wins, and he'll keep winning until someone stops him. And you think that someone is you? I think it has to be. Grant was quiet for a long time. Then he shook his head. You're the stubbornest woman I've ever met. I'll take that as a compliment. Grant almost smiled. Then he stood and walked to the door. Get some sleep. You're no good to anyone if you collapse. After he left, Vivian sat there alone in the dark. She thought about Harper's words, about the time they didn't have, about the foreclosure notice sitting in Grant's crate like a ticking bomb. She thought about Rourke, probably asleep in his warm bed, completely unconcerned about the people whose lives he had destroyed. And then she thought about the one thing Harper had said that stuck with her. If I can't make this stick, he walks away clean. Vivian stood. She walked over to the crate and pulled out the foreclosure notice. She read it again, slowly, looking for anything she might have missed, and then she saw it. The notice was dated 2 weeks ago, but the signature at the bottom, the county clerk's signature, was dated 3 weeks ago. Someone had backdated the document, which meant someone had filed the foreclosure before the deadline had actually passed. Vivian's hand started shaking. She set the notice down and pulled out the other documents. She checked the dates, the signatures, the timestamps, and she found the same discrepancy over and over. Documents dated before they should have been. Signatures that appeared days or weeks before the events they were supposed to authorize. It was sloppy, careless. The kind of mistake someone makes when they've been getting away with something for so long that they stop being careful. Vivian sat down and started writing. She wrote down every discrepancy, every backdated document, every impossible timeline. She cross-referenced them with the statements from Sarah and Tom and Henry, and slowly, piece by piece, the pattern became clear. Rourke wasn't just stealing land, he was doing it through a system so brazen, so confident, that he hadn't even bothered to cover his tracks properly. By the time the sun came up, Vivian had filled 3 pages with notes. She had the proof she needed. Now she just had to figure out what to do with it. Martha came by later that morning. She took one look at Vivian and frowned. "You look awful." "Thank you. Did you sleep at all?" "No." Martha set a basket on the table. "I brought food. You need to eat." Vivian didn't argue. She was too tired. She sat down and let Martha fuss over her, putting bread and cheese and dried meat in front of her. She ate mechanically, not tasting anything. "How did it go in Cheyenne, Martha asked. "Not great. The attorney said he'd look into it, but it'll take time." "Time we don't have." "I know." Martha sat down across from her. "So what are you going to do?" Vivian told her about the backdated documents, the discrepancies, the proof that Rourke had been filing foreclosures before they were legally due. Martha listened, her face growing harder with every word. "That bastard," she said when Vivian finished. "Yeah. So what now? You take this to the judge?" "The judge won't listen. He's part of the system." "Then who?" Vivian looked down at the papers. "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out." Martha reached across the table and took Vivian's hand. "You can't do this alone." "I'm not alone. I have you. And Grant. That's not enough." "It has to be." Martha squeezed her hand. "Vivian, I'm scared. I'm scared they're going to hurt you. I'm scared they're going to hurt Grant. I'm scared we're going to lose everything." Vivian looked at her. Martha's face was pale, her eyes wet. She looked like a woman who had already lost too much and couldn't bear to lose anything else. "Martha," Vivian said quietly, "I can't promise this will work, but I can promise I'm not going to stop trying." Martha nodded. She wiped her eyes and stood. "I need to get back to town, but if you need anything, you let me know." "I will." After Martha left, Vivian sat at the table for a long time, staring at the papers. She felt the weight of it pressing down on her, the fear and the exhaustion, and the knowledge that she was running out of time. And then she heard the sound of hooves outside. She stood and walked to the window. A man was riding up to the house. He was alone, dressed in a clean suit, sitting straight in the saddle. Vivian recognized him immediately. Calvin Rourke. She stepped outside before he could dismount. Grant was already coming out of the barn, his face hard. Rourke climbed down from his horse and tipped his hat. "Mrs. Shaw, Mr. Kessler, I hope I'm not interrupting." "What do you want?" Grant said. Rourke smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I wanted to check in, see how you're doing. I understand you've been asking a lot of questions around town." "That's my business," Vivian said. "It becomes my business when you start spreading lies about me." "I'm not spreading lies, I'm telling the truth." Rourke's smile didn't falter. "Mrs. Shaw, I understand you're upset. Your husband's in a difficult situation, but making accusations isn't going to help him. Neither is stealing from him." Rourke's expression hardened. "Careful, Mrs. Shaw. Slander is a serious offense." "So is fraud." Rourke took a step closer. Grant moved to stand beside Vivian, but she held up a hand to stop him. She wasn't going to back down. Not now. "Mrs. Shaw," Rourke said, his voice low, "I know about you. I know about Boston. I know about the job you lost. I know about the accusations you made against your employer, accusations that were never proven. Vivian felt her blood go cold. How do you? I make it my business to know who I'm dealing with. You have a history of causing trouble, of seeing conspiracies where there are none, of blaming others for your own failures. That's not true, isn't it? You were fired for incompetence, Mrs. Shaw, not for exposing fraud, for being a difficult, paranoid woman who couldn't accept that she wasn't as smart as she thought she was. Vivian's hands clenched into fists. She wanted to hit him. She wanted to scream. But she forced herself to stay calm. You're lying. Am I? Or are you just so desperate to feel important that you've convinced yourself you're some kind of hero? Rourke looked at Grant. Mr. Kessler, I'd be careful if I were you. This woman is going to ruin you. She's going to drag you into a fight you can't win. And when it's over, you'll have nothing left. Get off my land, Grant said. Rourke turned back to Vivian. You have 10 days, Mrs. Shaw. 10 days to come up with the money you owe. If you don't, I'll be back with the sheriff, and you'll both be removed from this property. And if you keep spreading lies about me, I'll make sure everyone in this territory knows exactly what kind of woman you are. He climbed back onto his horse and rode away. Vivian stood there, shaking, watching him disappear down the road. Grant put a hand on her shoulder. Vivian, he's lying, she said. Her voice was tight, strained. Everything he said, it's a lie. I know. Do you? Because it sounds like you're not sure. Grant turned her to face him. His expression was hard, but his eyes were steady. I don't care what he said. I don't care what happened in Boston. I care that you're here, and you're fighting for people no one else will fight for. That's all that matters. Vivian felt something break inside her. She had spent so long being told she was wrong, being told she was the problem, that hearing someone believe her felt like a shock to the system. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Grant let go of her shoulder. What do we do now? Vivian looked down the road where Rourke had disappeared. We make sure he regrets coming here. That night, Vivian sat at the table and wrote a letter. It was addressed to Daniel Harper, the territorial attorney. In it, she laid out everything she had found, the backdated documents, the forged signatures, the timeline that proved Rourke had been filing foreclosures illegally. She explained that Rourke had come to the ranch to threaten her, that he was trying to intimidate her into silence. She asked Harper to act quickly before more people lost their homes. When she was done, she sealed the letter and set it aside. Then she pulled out a second piece of paper and started writing again. This letter was different. It was addressed to the editor of the Cheyenne newspaper. In it, she outlined the fraud in broad strokes, without naming names. She described a system of land theft that had been operating unchecked for years, targeting desperate ranchers and widows. She asked the editor to investigate, to shine a light on what was happening in the small towns outside Cheyenne where no one was paying attention. She signed it with her full name, Vivian Shaw. Not Mrs. Kessler, not Grant's wife, just her name. The next morning, she rode into town and mailed both letters. Then she went to the general store and bought supplies. She didn't hurry. She let people see her, let them whisper about her, let them wonder what she was up to. On her way out of town, she stopped outside the land office. Rourke's horse was tied to the post outside. She stood there for a moment looking at the building, then rode away. When she got back to the ranch, Grant was waiting for her in the yard. Where were you? Mailing letters. To who? Harper, and a newspaper editor in Cheyenne. Grant stared at her. You're trying to force Harper's hand. I'm trying to make it impossible for him to ignore this. And if it backfires, then at least people will know what's happening. Grant shook his head. You're going to get us both killed. Maybe. But we're not going quietly. Grant looked at her for a long moment, then he nodded. All right, then let's make it count. Vivian smiled. It was the first real smile she had felt in weeks. That's the plan. Over the next few days, the tension in Red Flint grew thick enough to choke on. People stopped talking when Vivian walked past. The shopkeeper at the general store refused to serve her. Someone threw a rock through the window of Grant's barn in the middle of the night. But Vivian didn't stop. She kept going over the papers, kept refining her case, kept waiting for Harper to respond. And then, 5 days before the foreclosure was set to happen, a man rode up to the ranch. He was wearing a badge, and he had a rifle slung across his back. Vivian's heart sank. She walked outside expecting the worst, But the man climbed down from his horse and tipped his hat. Mrs. Shaw? Yes? I'm Deputy Marshal Webb. I'm here on behalf of Territorial Attorney Harper. He sent me to inform you that an investigation has been opened into the land fraud allegations you reported. All foreclosures in the affected counties have been suspended pending the outcome of that investigation. Vivian stared at him. Suspended? That's correct, mister. Rourke has been ordered to appear before the territorial court next week to answer questions about his business practices. Vivian felt her knees go weak. She grabbed the porch railing to steady herself. Thank you. Webb nodded. Ma'am, I'll be honest with you. This is going to get ugly. Rourke's not going to take this lying down. You need to be careful. I will. Webb climbed back onto his horse and rode away. Vivian stood there, staring after him, her heart pounding. Grant came out of the barn. What did he want? Vivian turned to him. She was shaking, but it wasn't from fear. It was from something else. Something that felt almost like hope. We won. What? Harper opened an investigation. The foreclosure's been suspended. Grant's eyes went wide. Then he laughed. It was a raw, disbelieving sound. We won. Not yet, but we're close. Grant walked over and pulled her into a hug. It surprised her. He wasn't the kind of man who hugged people. But he held on tight, and Vivian let him, because for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, they were going to survive this. When Grant finally let her go, Vivian stepped back and wiped her eyes. She hadn't realized she was crying. She turned away, embarrassed, but Grant didn't say anything. He just stood there, looking at her like he was seeing her for the first time. I need to tell Martha, Vivian said. Her voice was rough. I'll come with you. They rode into town together. The streets were quiet, but Vivian could feel eyes on them from every window, every doorway. Word had already spread. People knew something had happened. They just didn't know what yet. Martha's house was on the edge of town, a small wooden structure with a sagging porch. Vivian knocked, and Martha opened the door almost immediately. Her face was pale, her eyes red. I heard a marshal came by, Martha said. What happened? The foreclosure's been suspended, Vivian said. Harper opened an investigation. Rourke has to answer for what he's done. Martha's hand flew to her mouth. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she started crying. Not quiet tears, but the kind of sobbing that came from somewhere deep, the kind that had been held back for too long. Vivian pulled her into a hug, and Martha clung to her like she was drowning. I can't believe it, Martha whispered. I can't believe you actually did it. We're not done yet, Vivian said, but we're closer than we were. Martha pulled back and wiped her face. What happens now? Rourke goes to court. We testify. And if we're lucky, they put him away. And if we're not lucky? Vivian didn't answer. She didn't have an answer. Grant cleared his throat. We should get back. If Rourke hears about this, he's going to come looking for trouble. Vivian nodded. They said goodbye to Martha and rode back to the ranch. The whole way, Vivian kept expecting to see Rourke riding toward them, or the sheriff, or someone sent to make them pay for what they had done. But the road stayed empty. When they got back, Grant went to check on the horses, and Vivian went inside. She sat at the table and stared at the papers, at the evidence she had spent weeks gathering. It had worked. Against all odds, it had actually worked. But she didn't feel relieved. She felt hollowed out, like she had been running on nothing but anger and stubbornness for so long that now that it was over, there was nothing left. She heard the door open behind her. Grant came in and poured himself a cup of coffee. He sat down across from her and didn't say anything for a while. You should rest, he said finally. I can't. Why not? Because it's not over. Rourke's not going to just give up. He's going to fight back. And when he does, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Grant took a sip of his coffee. You're probably right. So what do? We keep going. What else is there? Vivian looked at him. His face was tired, lined with years of work and worry, but there was something solid in his expression, something that said he wasn't going anywhere. Thank you, she said. For what? For not giving up. Grant shrugged. I didn't have much choice. You wouldn't let me. Vivian almost smiled. Then she stood and walked to the window. The sun was setting, painting the hills in shades of gold and red. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. She thought about everything that had happened since she stepped off that stagecoach. The cold, the exhaustion, the fear. The nights she had spent bent over those papers, wondering if any of it would matter. And now, standing here, she realized it did matter. Maybe not in the way she had hoped. Maybe not with the kind of clean victory that made everything worthwhile. But it mattered. "Vivian," Grant said behind her, "what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking this place almost broke me." "But it didn't." "No, it didn't." Grant stood and came to stand beside her. They looked out at the hills together, at the land Grant had fought so hard to keep. "You saved my ranch," he said quietly. "We saved it. Both of us." Grant nodded. Then he turned and walked back to the barn, and Vivian stood there alone, watching the sun disappear below the horizon. The next morning, Vivian woke to the sound of shouting outside. She bolted upright, heart racing, and ran to the window. A group of men on horseback were riding up to the house. She recognized one of them immediately. Calvin Rourke. She grabbed her coat and ran outside. Grant was already there, standing in the yard with his rifle. Rourke dismounted, flanked by 4 men Vivian didn't recognize. They all had guns. "Mr. Kessler," Rourke said. His voice was calm, pleasant. "Mrs. Shaw." "Good morning." "Get off my land," Grant said. "I'm afraid I can't do that. You see, I've come to collect what's owed to me." "The foreclosure's been suspended. You know that." "Suspended, not canceled. And until the court rules otherwise, that debt is still valid." Rourke pulled a piece of paper from his coat and held it up. "This is a court order from Judge Harlan, authorizing me to seize assets in lieu of payment. Livestock, equipment, personal property. Whatever is necessary to satisfy the debt." Vivian stepped forward. "Judge Harlan doesn't have jurisdiction anymore. The Territorial Attorney's Office has opened an investigation," Rourke interrupted. "Yes, I'm aware. But until that investigation concludes, the county court still has authority, and Judge Harlan has ruled in my favor." "That's illegal," Vivian said. "That's the law, Mrs. Shaw. Or didn't they teach you that in Boston?" Vivian felt the anger rising in her chest. "You can't do this." "I already have." Rourke gestured to the men behind him. "Start with the horses." Grant raised his rifle. "Touch my horses, and I'll shoot you." The men stopped. Rourke's expression didn't change, but his eyes went cold. "Mr. Kessler, I'd advise you to put that down. Threatening an officer of the court is a crime." "So is stealing." "I'm not stealing. I'm collecting on a legal debt. If you interfere, I'll have the sheriff arrest you. And then you'll lose everything anyway, except you'll be doing it from a jail cell." Grant didn't lower the rifle. Vivian could see his hands shaking, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might break. She walked over and put a hand on his arm. "Grant," she said quietly. "Don't. They're taking my horses." "I know, but if you shoot him, we lose. We lose everything." Grant stared at Rourke. For a long moment, Vivian thought he might pull the trigger anyway. Then slowly, he lowered the rifle. Rourke smiled. "Wise decision." He gestured to his men. "Go ahead." The men walked past Grant and into the barn. Vivian heard the horses whinnying, the sound of hooves on wood. A few minutes later, the men came out leading all 3 horses. They tied them to their own horses and mounted up. Rourke climbed back onto his horse. "I'll be back in a few days for the rest. Unless, of course, you'd like to settle the debt now." "Go to hell," Grant said. Rourke tipped his hat. "Good day, Mrs. Shaw. Mr. Kessler." He rode away, and his men followed, leading Grant's horses behind them. Vivian and Grant stood in the yard, watching them disappear down the road. Grant turned and walked into the barn without a word. Vivian heard the sound of something breaking, then silence. She didn't go after him. She knew he needed to be alone. Instead, she went inside and sat at the table. She stared at the papers, at the evidence that had felt so important just yesterday. Now it felt like nothing. Rourke was still in control. He was still taking whatever he wanted, and there was nothing she could do to stop him. She heard footsteps behind her. Grant came in, his face dark. "I should have shot him." "Then you'd be in jail." "At least I'd have done something." Vivian stood and faced him. "You did do something. You stayed alive. You kept the ranch. That's more than most people manage." "For how long?" "He's going to keep coming back. He's going to take everything, piece by piece, until there's nothing left. Then we stop him." "How?" You saw what just happened. He's got the law on his side. He's got the judge. He's got everything. Not everything. Vivian walked over to the papers and picked up the letter she had written to the newspaper editor. He doesn't have the truth. Not yet. Grant looked at the letter, then at her. You think a newspaper is going to stop him? I think if enough people know what he's doing, someone will have to act. And if they don't? Vivian didn't answer. She couldn't. 2 days later, Martha came to the ranch. She was carrying a newspaper, and her face was pale. You need to see this, she said. Vivian took the paper. It was the Cheyenne edition, dated that morning. On the front page, in bold letters, was a headline that made her stomach drop. Local woman accused of fabricating fraud claims. Below it was an article. Vivian scanned it quickly, her hands shaking. It said that she had a history of making false accusations, that she had been fired from her job in Boston for incompetence and had blamed her employer instead of taking responsibility, that she was now trying to deflect attention from her husband's debts by inventing a conspiracy. At the bottom of the article was a quote from Calvin Rourke. Mrs. Shaw is a troubled woman who refuses to accept reality. I sympathize with her situation, but her accusations are baseless and damaging to the hardworking people of this territory. Vivian set the paper down. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold it. They're destroying you, Martha said. They're making you look like a liar. I'm not a liar. I know that. But everyone who reads this is going to think you are. Vivian sat down. She felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. She had known Rourke would fight back. She had expected threats, intimidation, maybe even violence. But she hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to use her past against her, to twist the truth until she looked like the villain. Grant came in from the yard. He saw the newspaper and his face went hard. What is this? Rourke's response, Martha said. He got to the editor before your letter could make an impact. How? Money. Influence. Does it matter? The point is, he's turning the whole territory against you. Grant picked up the paper and read it. Then he threw it across the room. This is bullshit. Of course it is, Vivian said. Her voice was flat, dead. But it doesn't matter if it's true. It only matters if people believe it. So what do we do? Vivian didn't answer. She didn't know what to do. For the first time since she had arrived in Red Flint, she felt defeated. Not tired, not scared. Defeated. Martha sat down beside her. Vivian, you can't give up. I'm not giving up. I'm just out of options. No, you're not. You still have Harper. You still have the investigation. Harper's investigation doesn't mean anything if no one believes me. Rourke's already convinced half the territory that I'm a liar. By the time this goes to court, my testimony won't be worth anything. Then we find another way to prove it. How? Martha didn't have an answer. None of them did. That night, Vivian lay in her narrow bed, staring at the crack in the wall. She thought about Boston, about the moment she had walked into her supervisor's office and realized that no one was going to believe her. She thought about the months that followed, the doors that closed, the whispers behind her back. She thought about the moment she had decided to leave, to start over, to find somewhere she could matter. And now, lying here in this freezing room, she realized she had been wrong. She couldn't outrun her past. It had followed her here, and Rourke had used it to destroy her all over again. She heard footsteps outside, then a knock on the door. Vivian? It was Grant. She didn't answer. He opened the door and came in. He stood there for a moment, then sat down on the edge of the bed. You can't let him win. He already won. No, he didn't. Not yet. Vivian turned to look at him. His face was shadowed in the dim light, but his eyes were steady. Grant, I don't know how to fight this. I don't know how to convince people I'm telling the truth when everyone thinks I'm a liar. Then don't convince them. Prove it. How? Grant was quiet for a moment. Then he said, We get the county clerk. Vivian sat up. What? The man who's been signing all the forged documents. He's the weak link. If we can get him to talk, to admit what he's been doing, we don't need to convince anyone. We'll have a confession. Vivian stared at him. He's not going to talk. He's in too deep. Then we make him talk. How? Grant's expression was hard. I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. Vivian felt something shift inside her. Not hope, exactly, but something close to it. You really think we can do this? I think we have to try. Vivian nodded. She swung her legs out of bed and stood. All right, let's figure it out. They went into the kitchen and sat at the table. Grant lit the oil lamp, and Vivian pulled out the papers. They went over everything again, looking for anything they might have missed. And then Vivian found it. It was a small notation on one of the amended loan documents, a reference number that corresponded to a filing in the county clerk's office. She pulled out another document and checked the reference number. It was the same, and another, the same again. What are you thinking? Grant asked. Every forged document has the same reference number, which means they were all filed together, which means there's a master file somewhere in the clerk's office that ties all of this together. So we get the file. How? We can't just walk into the clerk's office and ask for it. Grant leaned back in his chair. No, but I know someone who can. Who? Martha's husband used to work as a clerk before he bought the ranch. He still has friends in the office. Maybe one of them can help. Vivian looked at him. That's a long shot. It's the only shot we've got. Vivian nodded. All right, let's ask Martha. They rode into town the next morning. Martha was sweeping her porch when they arrived. She looked up, surprised. What are you doing here? She asked. We need your help, Vivian said. They told her about the reference numbers, the master file, the plan to get inside the clerk's office. Martha listened, her face growing more and more tense. You're asking me to get someone to commit a crime, she said when they finished. We're asking you to help us expose one, Vivian said. Martha shook her head. I don't know if anyone will do it. It's too risky. Then we're out of options. Martha looked at her, then at Grant. There's one person who might help. His name is Peter Dalton. He worked with my husband. They were close, but I haven't spoken to him since my husband died. I don't know if he'll listen to me. Will you try? Vivian asked. Martha hesitated, then she nodded. I'll try. She went inside and came back with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The clerk's office is on the other side of town. Follow me. They walked through the streets, past the saloon, past the general store, past the land office where Rourke's horse was tied outside. Vivian felt his eyes on her as they passed, but she didn't look at him. She kept walking. The clerk's office was a small building near the courthouse. Martha knocked on the door, and a young man opened it. He looked at Martha, and his face softened. Martha, he said, it's been a long time. I know. I'm sorry, Peter. I should have come sooner. Peter nodded. He glanced at Vivian and Grant. Who are they? Friends. Can we come in? Peter hesitated, then stepped aside. They went inside. The office was cramped, filled with shelves stacked with ledgers and filing boxes. There was a desk in the corner covered with papers. What do you need? Peter asked. Martha told him. Vivian watched his face as she spoke, saw the doubt, the fear. When Martha finished, Peter shook his head. I can't do that. If anyone finds out, they won't, Martha said. We'll be careful. No, you don't understand. Rourke owns this town. If I help you, I'll lose my job. Maybe worse. Peter, my husband died because of what Rourke did. He died because no one would stand up to him. Don't let that happen to someone else. Peter looked down at his hands. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, What do you need? Vivian told him about the reference number, the master file. Peter walked over to one of the shelves and pulled down a ledger. He flipped through it, then stopped. This is it, he said. He pulled out a folder and handed it to Vivian. But you can't take it. If it goes missing, they'll know. Can you make copies? Vivian asked. Peter looked at the folder, then at her. It'll take time. How much time? A few hours, maybe more. We'll wait. Peter nodded. He sat down at the desk and started copying the documents by hand. Vivian, Gran, and Martha stood there in silence, watching him work. Outside, the sun climbed higher in the sky. Vivian's heart pounded in her chest. She kept expecting someone to come through the door, to catch them, to end everything right here. But no one came. By the time Peter finished, it was late afternoon. He handed Vivian a stack of papers. That's everything, but you didn't get it from me. We didn't, Vivian said. Thank you, Peter. Peter nodded. He looked at Martha. I hope this helps. I hope you get the bastard. We will, Martha said. They left the clerk's office and walked back through town. Vivian clutched the papers to her chest, afraid to let them go. When they got back to Martha's house, she spread them out on the table. And there it was, the master file. Every forged signature, every backdated document, every fraudulent loan amendment, all of it tied together in one neat package. "This is it," Vivian said. Her voice was shaking. "This is the proof we need." Grant leaned over the table, looking at the papers. "So what now?" "Now we take this to Harper, and we make sure Rourke never steals from anyone again." Martha smiled. It was the first real smile Vivian had seen on her face in weeks. "You did it." "We did it," Vivian said. "All of us." They stayed at Martha's house until dark, going over the documents, making sure everything was in order. Then Vivian and Grant rode back to the ranch. The whole way, Vivian kept looking over her shoulder, expecting to see Rourke riding after them, but the road stayed empty. When they got back to the ranch, Vivian put the papers in the satchel and hid it under her bed. Then she sat at the kitchen table and let herself breathe for the first time in hours. Grant poured her a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. "You did it," he said. "We're not done yet." "I know, but we're close." Vivian nodded. She looked at him, at the exhaustion in his face, the hope in his eyes. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For believing me, even when no one else did." Grant shrugged. "You gave me a reason to." They sat there in silence, drinking their coffee, and for the first time since Vivian had arrived in Red Flint, the future felt like something other than a fight she was going to lose. The next morning, Vivian woke to the sound of horses outside. She sat up, her heart racing, and ran to the window. A group of riders was coming up the road, but this time it wasn't Rourke. It was Deputy Marshal Webb, along with two other men in uniforms. Vivian grabbed her coat and ran outside. Grant was already there, watching them approach. Webb dismounted and tipped his hat. "Mrs. Shaw, Mr. Kessler, I'm here on behalf of Territorial Attorney Harper. He's requested that you come to Cheyenne immediately. The hearing is being moved up." "Moved up?" Vivian said. "Why?" "Because Rourke's trying to leave the territory. Harper got word yesterday that he's been selling assets, closing accounts. If we don't move now, he's going to disappear." Vivian felt a chill run down her spine. "When is the hearing?" "Tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm here to escort you. We leave in an hour." Vivian looked at Grant. His face was hard, determined. "We'll be ready," he said. Webb nodded. "Good. And Mrs. Shaw? Harper asked me to tell you to bring everything you've got. He's going to need it." Vivian went inside and grabbed the satchel. She checked the papers one more time, making sure everything was there. Then she walked back outside where Grant was waiting with the wagon. They climbed in, and Webb and his men rode ahead. As they pulled away from the ranch, Vivian looked back at the house, at the barn, at the hills rolling away into the distance. This was it. This was the moment everything had been leading to, and she was ready. The ride to Cheyenne took most of the day. Webb and his men rode ahead, and Grant drove the wagon with Vivian beside him. Neither of them spoke much. There wasn't much to say. Everything they had fought for, everything they had risked, was about to be decided in a courtroom by people who didn't know them and might not care. Vivian kept her hand on the satchel the entire way, as if letting go would make the evidence inside disappear. She thought about Rourke, about the smug certainty in his eyes every time he had looked at her. She thought about Sarah and Tom and Henry, about all the people who had lost everything and been told it was their own fault. She thought about Martha's husband, driving his wagon off a cliff because he couldn't see another way out. And she thought about herself, stepping off that stagecoach into the mud, arriving with nothing but a worn suitcase and the stubborn refusal to be thrown away again. By the time they reached Cheyenne, the sun was setting. Webb led them to a boarding house near the courthouse and told them to get some rest. The hearing would start at 9 in the morning. Vivian didn't sleep. She lay in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, going over everything in her head. The evidence, the timeline, the names. She rehearsed what she would say, how she would present it, what questions they might ask. She went over it so many times that the words started to blur together. Around midnight, there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find Grant standing in the hallway, still dressed. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "No." "Want some company?" Vivian nodded. They went downstairs to the small sitting room. It was empty except for a few chairs and a cold fireplace. They sat down, and Grant poured them each a glass of whiskey from a bottle he had brought. To tomorrow, he said, raising his glass. Vivian clinked hers against his. To tomorrow. They drank in silence. After a while, Grant set his glass down and looked at her. What are you going to do after this is over? I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. You should. You can't just keep fighting forever. Why not? Grant almost smiled. Because eventually you'll run out of things to fight. Vivian looked down at her hands. I don't know how to do anything else. That's not true. You know how to survive. That's more than most people can say. Surviving isn't the same as living. No, but it's a start. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then she said, What about you? What are you going to do? Keep the ranch. Try to make it work. Maybe hire some help now that I'm not drowning in debt. You could sell it. Start over somewhere else. Grant shook his head. That land is all I've got. I'm not letting it go. Even after everything? Especially after everything. Vivian understood. The ranch wasn't just land to him. It was proof that he had survived, that he hadn't given up. It was the same reason she couldn't walk away from this fight, because walking away meant letting Rourke win, and she would rather die than let that happen. They sat there until the sky outside started to lighten. Then they went back to their rooms and tried to rest for the few hours they had left. The courthouse was already crowded when they arrived. Vivian saw faces she recognized, people from Red Flint, ranchers, shopkeepers, men and women who had come to see what would happen. She saw Sarah sitting near the back, her hands folded in her lap. She saw Tom standing near the door, his arms crossed. She saw Henry in the corner, looking like he wished he was anywhere else. And she saw Martha, sitting in the front row, her face pale but determined. Webb led Vivian and Grant to a table near the front. Across the aisle sat Calvin Rourke, flanked by two lawyers in expensive suits. He looked calm, composed, like he was sitting down to a business meeting instead of a trial. When he saw Vivian, he smiled. Vivian felt the anger rising in her chest, but she forced it down. She couldn't afford to lose control. Not now. The judge entered, and everyone stood. His name was Morgan, and he had a face like carved granite. He sat down, and everyone else followed suit. We're here today to address allegations of fraud and misconduct brought against Mr. Calvin Rourke, Judge Morgan said. His voice was flat, businesslike. Mr. Harper, you may proceed. Daniel Harper stood. He was wearing the same expensive suit Vivian had seen before, but today he looked sharper, more focused. Your Honor, the territory intends to prove that Mr. Rourke engaged in a systematic scheme to defraud landowners across multiple counties. We have evidence of forged signatures, backdated documents, and false accounting practices designed to inflate debts and seize property unlawfully. One of Rourke's lawyers stood. He was older, with silver hair and a voice that sounded like it had been oiled. Your Honor, these allegations are baseless. Mr. Rourke is a respected businessman who has operated within the bounds of the law for over a decade. The so-called evidence is nothing more than the desperate fabrications of individuals who failed to meet their financial obligations. Judge Morgan looked at Harper. Do you have proof of these allegations? We do, Your Honor, and we have witnesses prepared to testify. Then let's hear it. Harper called Vivian to the stand first. She walked up, her legs shaking, and sat down. The clerk swore her in, and Harper approached. Mrs. Shaw, can you tell the court how you became involved in this matter? Vivian took a breath. I came to Red Flint to marry Grant Kessler. When I arrived, I discovered that his ranch was facing foreclosure. I reviewed his financial records and found discrepancies that suggested fraud. What kind of discrepancies? Forged signatures, inflated loan amounts, penalties and fees that appeared without explanation. The debt Mr. Kessler was told he owed didn't match the original loan terms. And what did you do when you discovered this? I started investigating. I spoke to other people in the area who had lost their land under similar circumstances. I gathered statements, compared documents, and identified a pattern of fraud. And what did you find? Vivian opened the satchel and pulled out the papers. I found that every fraudulent document had been signed by the same county clerk. I found that the dates on these documents had been altered to make foreclosures appear legal when they weren't. And I found that Mr. Rourke was behind all of it. Rourke's lawyer stood. Objection, Your Honor. Mrs. Shaw is not a legal expert. She's drawing conclusions based on her own biased interpretation of the evidence. Overruled, Judge Morgan said. She's testifying to what she observed. Continue, Mr. Harper. Harper took the papers from Vivian and handed them to the judge. Your Honor, these documents show a clear pattern of misconduct. Backdated filings, forged amendments, inflated debts, all designed to seize property from individuals who were unable to defend themselves. Judge Morgan looked through the papers. His expression didn't change, but Vivian saw his jaw tighten. Rourke's lawyer stood again. Your Honor, I'd like to question the witness. Go ahead. The lawyer approached Vivian. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Mrs. Shaw, isn't it true that you were fired from your previous job in Boston for making false accusations against your employer? Vivian felt her chest tighten. That's not what happened, isn't it? According to records we obtained, you claimed your employer was engaged in financial misconduct. An investigation was conducted and no evidence was found to support your claims. You were subsequently terminated. Because they covered it up. Or because your accusations were false. They weren't false. And yet here you are, making similar accusations against Mr. Rourke. One might argue you have a pattern of seeing conspiracies where none exist. Vivian's hands clenched into fists. I'm not imagining this. The evidence is right there. The evidence you gathered while living on Mr. Kessler's property depended on his goodwill. Isn't it possible you fabricated this evidence to justify your presence there? No. Isn't it possible you're simply a bitter woman looking for someone to blame for her own failures? Vivian stood up. I'm not bitter, I'm not a liar, and I'm not imagining this. Calvin Rourke is a thief, and if you had any integrity, you'd admit it. Mrs. Shaw, sit down, Judge Morgan said. Vivian sat. Her heart was pounding, her hands shaking. She had lost her temper. She had let Rourke's lawyer get to her. And now she looked exactly like what they wanted her to look like. Unstable, emotional, unreliable. The lawyer smiled. No further questions, Your Honor. Harper called Grant next. Grant walked to the stand, his face hard. He answered Harper's questions clearly, calmly. He described the loan, the payments he had made, the notices he had received. He showed the records he had kept, what little there was. When Rourke's lawyer cross-examined him, Grant didn't flinch. He didn't get angry. He just told the truth, and the lawyer couldn't shake him. Then Harper called Sarah. She was terrified, her voice barely above a whisper, but she told her story. She talked about her husband, about the loan they had taken, about the debt that had appeared out of nowhere. She cried when she talked about losing her home, and the courtroom was silent. Rourke's lawyer tried to tear her apart, but she didn't break. She just kept repeating the same thing. We paid on time, every month, and they still took everything. Tom came next, then Henry, then 3 other ranchers who had lost their land. They all told the same story. Small discrepancies at first, then larger ones, then foreclosure, then nothing. By the time the last witness finished, it was late afternoon. Judge Morgan called a recess and said he would render his decision the next morning. Vivian walked out of the courtroom feeling hollow. She had done everything she could. She had presented the evidence, told the truth, brought witnesses who backed her up. But she didn't know if it was enough. She didn't know if Judge Morgan believed her. Grant came up beside her. You did good in there. I lost my temper. So what? You were honest. That's more than Rourke's ever been. Vivian looked back at the courthouse. Rourke was standing on the steps talking to his lawyers. He looked completely unconcerned, like the whole thing was a minor inconvenience. When he saw Vivian watching, he tipped his hat. She turned away. That night, Vivian sat in her room at the boarding house and tried not to think about what would happen if they lost. If Rourke walked away. If the judge decided she was just a bitter woman making false accusations. If everything she had done meant nothing. There was a knock on the door. She opened it to find Martha standing there, her eyes red. Can I come in? Martha asked. Of course. Martha sat down on the edge of the bed. I've been thinking about my husband, about what he would say if he could see this. What do you think he'd say? I think he'd say thank you. I think he'd say you gave him something he never had. Justice. Vivian sat down beside her. We don't know if we're going to win. I know. But you tried. That's more than anyone else did. They sat there in silence for a while. Then Martha stood and walked to the door. Get some sleep, Vivian. Tomorrow's going to be hard. After Martha left, Vivian lay down and closed her eyes. She didn't sleep, but she rested, and that was enough. The courtroom was packed the next morning. Vivian sat at the table with Grant on one side and Harper on the other. Across the aisle, Rourke sat with his lawyers, looking as calm as ever. Judge Morgan entered, and everyone stood. He sat down, opened a folder, and looked at the room. "I've reviewed the evidence presented by both sides," he said, "and I've considered the testimony of the witnesses. This is not an easy case. The allegations are serious, and the evidence is complex. But after careful consideration, I've reached a decision." Vivian's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. "I find that the evidence presented by the territory is compelling," Judge Morgan said. "The pattern of backdated documents, forged signatures, and inflated debts is clear and consistent. Furthermore, the testimony of multiple witnesses corroborates the claim that Mr. Rourke engaged in fraudulent practices designed to seize property unlawfully." Rourke's face went pale. His lawyers leaned in, whispering urgently. "I am issuing an immediate injunction against all foreclosures filed by Mr. Rourke or his associates," Judge Morgan continued. "All properties seized within the past 5 years will be reviewed, and victims of this fraud will have the opportunity to reclaim their land. Furthermore, I am ordering a full criminal investigation into Mr. Rourke's business practices. If the findings support the allegations, he will face charges of fraud, forgery, and theft." He looked directly at Rourke. "Mr. Rourke, you are hereby barred from conducting any further business in this territory pending the outcome of the investigation. This court is adjourned." The courtroom erupted. People were shouting, crying, hugging each other. Vivian sat there, frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Grant grabbed her arm. "We won." "What?" "We won, Vivian. We actually won." Vivian looked at him, then at Harper, who was smiling. Then she looked across the aisle at Rourke. He was standing, his face twisted with rage, his lawyers trying to calm him down. He looked at Vivian, and for a moment their eyes met. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just looked at him until he turned away. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Sarah was crying. Tom was shaking Harper's hand. Henry was standing off to the side, looking stunned. Martha ran up and threw her arms around Vivian. "You did it," she said. "You actually did it." Vivian hugged her back. "We did it. All of us." A man pushed through the crowd. It was Peter, the clerk who had helped them. He looked scared but relieved. "Mrs. Shaw, I just wanted to say thank you for what you did." "Thank you for helping us," Vivian said. "We couldn't have done this without you." Peter nodded and disappeared back into the crowd. Grant came up beside her. "What now?" "Now we go home." They walked back to the boarding house, collected their things, and climbed into the wagon. Webb and his men escorted them back to Red Flint, but this time the ride felt different, lighter. Like the weight Vivian had been carrying for weeks had finally lifted. When they reached the ranch, it looked the same as it always had, small, worn, barely holding together. But this time, when Vivian looked at it, she didn't see defeat. She saw survival. Grant climbed down from the wagon and stood there looking at the house. "I guess this is still mine." "It was always yours," Vivian said. "Rourke just tried to take it." Grant turned to look at her. "What are you going to do now?" "I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead." "You could stay, if you want." Vivian looked at him, surprised. "Stay? Yeah, I mean, we're married, technically, and this place could use someone who knows how to keep the books straight." Vivian almost laughed. "Is that a proposal?" "It's an offer, a real one this time." Vivian looked at the house, at the barn, at the hills rolling away into the distance. She thought about Boston, about the life she had left behind. She thought about the stagecoach ride, the mud, the cold. She thought about sitting at that kitchen table, bent over those papers, refusing to give up. And she thought about the moment Grant had burned her letter without reading it, and how much had changed since then. "All right," she said. "I'll stay." Grant nodded. He almost smiled. "Good. Because I was running out of ideas." Over the next few weeks, the territory underwent a reckoning. The criminal investigation into Rourke's practices uncovered even more fraud than Vivian had documented. Properties were returned to their rightful owners. The county clerk was arrested. Judge Harlan was removed from the bench, and Rourke himself was charged with multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and theft. He tried to run. He made it as far as the Montana border before the marshals caught him. By the time he was brought back to stand trial, his empire had collapsed. His land, his money, his influence, all of it was gone. Sarah got her property back, Tom got his, Henry got his, though he sold it and moved away. He said he didn't want to stay in a place that held so many bad memories. Martha stayed in Red Flint. She started working with Vivian, helping other victims of the fraud navigate the process of reclaiming their land. She stopped looking like a ghost and started looking like a woman who had found a reason to keep going. And Grant's ranch slowly came back to life. He bought new horses, he fixed the roof, he planted crops, he hired a ranch hand to help with the work. And every night he came into the house and found Vivian sitting at the kitchen table, going over the books, making sure every number was right. One evening, about 2 months after the trial, Grant came in and found her staring at a letter. She had been staring at it for a while. "What's that?" he asked. Vivian handed it to him. "It's from the editor of the Cheyenne newspaper. He wants to interview me. He says people are calling me a hero." Grant read the letter, then handed it back. "Are you going to do it?" "I don't know. I'm not a hero. I just did what needed to be done." "That's what heroes do." Vivian looked at him. "I spent my whole life being told I didn't matter, that I was too old, too difficult, too much trouble. And then I came here, and I found out I was right all along. I do matter. What I do matters. And no one gets to tell me otherwise anymore." Grant sat down across from her. "So what are you going to tell the editor?" Vivian picked up the letter and set it aside. "I'll tell him the truth, that this wasn't about me. It was about everyone who's ever been cheated and told it was their own fault. It was about refusing to let people like Rourke win just because they think they can. And I'll tell him I'm done fighting for a while. I've got a ranch to help run." Grant smiled. It was a real smile this time, not the ghost of one. "You're a hell of a woman, Vivian Shaw." "Yeah," Vivian said, "I am." By the time winter came, the ranch was in better shape than it had been in years. The barn had a new roof, the fences were repaired, the horses were healthy. Grant had even managed to turn a small profit for the first time since his brother died. Vivian stood on the porch one morning, looking out at the hills. The sky was gray, and snow was starting to fall. It was cold, but not the kind of cold that bit through you. It was the kind of cold that felt clean, like it was washing away everything that had come before. Grant came out and stood beside her. "You ever regret it? Coming here?" Vivian thought about it. She thought about the stagecoach, the mud, the freezing nights in that narrow bed. She thought about the fear, the exhaustion, the moment she had stood in Rourke's office and realized he was never going to take her seriously. She thought about the fight, the trial, the moment Judge Morgan had ruled in their favor. "No," she said, "I don't regret it." "Why not?" "Because I found something here I didn't have before." "What's that?" Vivian looked at him, then back at the hills. "A place where I matter." Grant nodded. They stood there together, watching the snow fall, and for the first time in a long time, Vivian felt something that wasn't anger or fear or stubbornness. She felt peace. The ranch wasn't perfect. Neither was she. Neither was Grant. But they had survived. They had fought back. And they had won. And that was enough.